Good afternoon or good evening, good morning perhaps whenever you're watching this. This video is being created for TEC-544 through Grand Canyon University. This is my final benchmark titled Creating Alternative Delivery for Professional Development. First thing I'm supposed to do is begin by first evaluating the original professional development, talk about how it met the needs of the teachers and the students. The professional development that I'm uh, analyzing or reviewing today was one I did on fifth grade information for literacy research skills. I felt that the literacy research skills were something that was definitely needed in my class, as well as other classes I see throughout the school. Now, the way that I did this professional development with the teachers was by creating a narrated version of a Prezi presentation. And so the presentation itself was then sent out in video form for the teachers to watch as I narrated it. Hindsight being 2020, um, a narrated video is probably not the best way to do a professional development, but that's what I chose to do at the time. It was effective in deepening teachers' knowledge and improving their skills when using technology to increase student learning. Because it went over several key things. For example, making sure that your students knew how to answer the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why when they were looking for information. I also talked about Boolean searches using Google, Yandex, and DuckDuckGo, and talked about, again, narrated examples of different Boolean searches, such as and. If you were looking for the habitat that owls nested in during the summer months, you could just put, instead of searching the entire string, where do owls nest in the summer months, you could put owls nest summer, or put owls and summer and nest, and it would shrink the results, trying to help kids find information faster, and also explaining to the teachers that Google really didn't have an index as far as importance of information. So just because a piece of information showed up on the first page, it didn't mean that it was any more valid or any more important or held any more information than something that showed up on page 3000. And there's tons of information out there. So I wanted them to understand how to narrow that search down using Boolean operators was the first thing that I discussed. The next thing that we talked about, or the next thing that I talked about in the video, was evaluating information. Again, talking about the reliability of it. Wikipedia not necessarily being the best thing. However, you can get some good information off of Wikipedia, and we talked about that. I talked about that in the video. I suggested that they use URLs such as edu.gov, org, mil, and the dreaded tilde. So also talked about some Google Advanced search features and how they could narrow things down to just use credible websites rather than using everything. The other thing that I talked to them about, or talked at them about, I really do not like the way that it was done now that I'm further along in the process, was copyright and fair use policies and laws, and how the children and teachers needed to give recognition and credit to those who created the content that they are using. Even though we have fair use policy, it's still good to do, and teachers need to make sure that what they're using is being used for an educational purpose, not just to make something cute, because then it does not fall under fair use policy. Um, yeah, that was the first part. This was not a good presentation as far as effectiveness, I think, in delivery. So I'm liking the opportunity to go back and do this again, and imagining that the principal has asked me to do this in a different way, and having the opportunity to talk about how I would do that. So in part two, we'll do that now. So I need to discuss the implementation of the professional development the second time around, which I'm really excited about. I would still use the Prezi presentation, but I would do it live, or I would do it via a Zoom meeting. And I would definitely do a lot more hands-on stuff with the teachers using technology. So their device would be needed. They need to bring their device or a device from their classroom. And rather than just talking about Google, Yandex, and DuckDuckGo, we would do a search on Google, on Yandex, and DuckDuckGo, maybe for something that's a little controversial in our country, maybe something to do with a hot topic right now, and look at how the results come back from Google versus Yandex and DuckDuckGo. For those of you that don't know, Yandex is a search engine from another country, and DuckDuckGo tries not to. Well, for number one, they don't track your searches, and so they're not getting information based on the search string that you're commonly using. Google has all kinds of powerful software behind it, and does a lot of things that are done behind the scenes that you really don't know. So, if you're doing a search on one of those three things, they would be surprised to see the different results that pop up. And then I would have them do some hands-on operations with the Boolean operators and, or, and not, and nor, so they can see how they go from 10,000 websites or 10,000 hits of information on Google to 5,000 to 1,000. So you can really, really narrow that down. Excuse me. For the evaluating information portion of it, we would look at some Wikipedias that are not very factual, not reliable. And then we would look at a Wikipedia that was reliable. The thing about Wikipedia is people are allowed to go in and make changes to it, and it's supposed to be a community-based database of information. The problem with that is there's people out there who just find pleasure in going on Wikipedia and putting up false information. Or deleting information and changing it so that the truth is not there. And it's up to the community to self-regulate and make sure that that information is true and is in fact factual and reliable. Then we would look at the different types of URLs so that they can understand the difference between an edu and a gov, and talk about the reliability there. I think that a lot of these basic skills are overlooked, and so it would benefit the teachers a lot to have some hands-on use. For copyright and fair use, I'd give a couple examples, and we would do some live examples on asking them with a poll through Google whether or not they thought that it was copyright infringement, what I was showing them, or if it fell under fair use policy. And I think that we would be interested to see the results of what they think. Again, with a school my size that I'm currently attending, we have about 100 adults in the building. About 60 of us are certified staff that come to faculty meetings and professional developments. So we have a large group to gather our data from. So again, how I would change it, I would definitely do hands-on, interactive, as much hands-on as possible. I want them in the trenches doing. Okay. And in closing, I would have a question and answer session. And I would also have a sign up if they wanted to sign up for additional support that I would be available for during my planning period right now as a classroom teacher, or next year as a tech coach, hopefully, fingers crossed, that I would be able to come and do that. So those are all best practices in delivering information using technology. That's one way. There are numerous ways that this professional development could be improved upon, from the initial. Let's just make a video and send out a PowerPoint. And I read the PowerPoint. It really was not the greatest idea. It looked good on paper, but after watching it, it's just not good. So common issues related to software is the third part, hardware and connectivity problems within digital learning environments. You cannot control the connectivity on the internet, but you can do a couple things to help with it and make it better than it should be. The first thing, first and foremost, anytime you have a technology problem with the device, the first thing you can do, save your work. Now, if you're working on Google, you don't have to worry about saving it. Save your work, shut the machine down, give it 30 seconds, and power it back up again. That's the first thing that I would offer to teachers and students with hardware. I would shut it down and restart it. Software, the same thing. Shut it down and restart it. There's a lot of times that a piece of software you're using will not function correctly, or a website that you're trying to pull up might not pull up. But if you restart that computer, a lot of times the software is having a hard time because of the hardware. As far as internet connectivity goes, again, you really don't have control over that in the public school setting, but there are things you can do to help the process, such as not having 1,000,001 tabs open. A lot of the websites that we go to have ads on them that are constantly changing and refreshing in the background. That's using bandwidth. And you have to think about bandwidth as a water hose. You've only got so much water that can go through that hose. Okay. The larger the hose is, the more information that can go through it. So the more, or the more, yeah, the more tabs that a person has opened, they're squeezing that hose down to a smaller and smaller diameter, and they're reducing the flow of the water. That's not a good thing. As far as common things that we're dealing with software, um, 99% of the time, if you have a problem with any of the Google suites, it's because you have a connectivity issue. Again, making sure that you don't have excessive amounts of tabs opens. Now, for the classroom teacher, if your district does not have you locked down, you can hit the Windows R button and type %temp% and hit enter. And what that's going to do is it's going to pull up your temporary folder. And in your temporary folder for Windows, you've got all the temp files that are in there. And you can delete those temp files, and that speeds your computer up. The other thing you can make sure you do, teachers are notorious for leaving their computers on in the afternoon. Shut those computers down in the afternoon, and let them take a break. They are machines. They need to restart. And when you come in to work the next morning and restart it, you're going to be good to go. And I know that I've talked about numerous tabs open, but I have literally walked into teachers' classrooms and they'll have 50 tabs open on the top of Google Chrome. And you can't even see what each tab is supposed to be because they're so small. Another hardware issue that we have a lot of times is the printer won't work, or the monitor won't work, or the webcam won't work, or the computer won't turn on. So I would suggest checking connectivity as far as cables are concerned. Make sure that all your cables are plugged in properly, that they're firmly in place, and that they're all going to the proper spot. I would hate to allude that a child would ever change cords behind a teacher's computer, but it happens all the time. And so, especially with Promethean boards, the sound will stop working because something got unplugged, or the HDMI cable got unplugged and the computer's no longer connecting to the Promethean board, which leads us on to another issue. Connectivity between your computer and your Promethean board in some classrooms is an HDMI cable. In other classrooms, it's Bluetooth or over the Wi-Fi. So you need to make sure that in the bottom right-hand corner, you have all the connectivity running that should be running in order for all of your devices to work correctly. The Promethean board needs to be shut down on a daily basis also. It also needs to be refreshed and allowed to rest. And again, if you're not in your classroom and you're going to be gone over an extended period of time, you have a 3-day weekend, or you're out for spring break, everything needs to get unplugged. Now, don't unplug all the cords from the back of your computer or your Promethean board, but I would suggest unplugging the main power cord that goes into the wall that's attached to the circuit breaker that you should have running, or the surge protector that you have running all of your cords through. So I hope that this adequately explains how I would do things differently for this particular presentation, and I hope that I adequately suggested some tips for common problems. I would also suggest that at the end of that presentation, I would have another sign up for any teachers that had connectivity, software, or hardware issues in their classroom that I could fix, and I would do my best to fix those that day before I went home. Those that I could not get to, I'd have to create a schedule, or they could sign up for a slot on the calendar that I would share with them as their technology coach. I hope that you have a great day, and it's been a pleasure being part of your course.